Earth is a school and our childhood is like the curriculum. I believe we pick our parents and certain situations, and the whole point of existence is to evolve our consciousness. And so much of evolving our consciousness happens with inner child work, because so much of the burden and so much of the belief systems that dim our consciousness are formed in childhood. So when we can liberate ourselves from those, we elevate our consciousness and we step more into like our soul alignment. Life gets a lot less triggering when we do inner child work.
2, 1, 0.
Hi, and welcome to Stellar Life Podcast. This is your host, Orion, and today I have with me Christine Hostler. She is a master coach, spiritual psychologist, facilitator, and speaker with 20 years of experience. She is the best-selling author of 3 books and the host of the top-rated podcast, Over It and On With It. Christine is also the co-founder of Elementum Coaching Institute, a premier coaching certification program. She appeared in the Today Show, CNN, ABC, CBC, Fox, E, and more. Christine believes once we get out of our own way, we can show up to make the meaningful impact we are here to make. And in this conversation, we talked about how beliefs and stories from your childhood shapes your reality, how to connect with your inner child. What role does your inner child play in shaping your adult fears, habits, and relationship, and how to heal your inner child, love him or her, embrace, take care of, and break through in your life. So without further ado, on to the show. Hi, Christine, and welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I'm excited to have this conversation with you.
Yeah. Maybe you can start by sharing a little bit about yourself, about what brought you to find your mission and what you're doing today.
Oh my gosh. Well, that is such a long story, so I will condense it. It really was through my own challenges. I have been a coach and a spiritual psychologist for 20 years now. And so there's been so many different iterations of my career and my journey and my mission and what matters to me, depending on what's going on in my own life. I started my career and my adult life out in Hollywood. I was promoted to pretty much one of the youngest ever female agents. And I was dating the head of a movie studio at the time. And I had this really glamorous life and pretty much kind of checked a lot of the boxes off the list by the time I was 23, 24. But I was miserable because I had depression and anxiety that had carried over from childhood that I never really dealt with. I compensated for mass insecurity and different traumas through achieving and through trying to prove myself. And, having those traumas and those insecurities, they can really propel you to go out and do things in the world, because pain can be a great motivator in a lot of ways. But if we never really deal with the pain and we're just trying to basically run from it, it does catch up with us. And so around like my early 20s, it really just caught up with me. And I was engaged, and I ended up, my fiance broke up with me 6 months before the wedding, and I had a health crisis, and I was estranged from my family at the time. And even though I had made a lot of money, I was all of a sudden in debt. And I just had my quarter life crisis and went to find books about it. And there were books on the quarter life crisis, but they were all about like finding the job and finding the relationship. And there wasn't a personal development book for people and for women in their 20s. And I had been working with a coach at the time, and psychology had always been my passion. I minored in it in college. And I thought, well, gosh, maybe I need to write the book that I need. And so in 2004, I wrote 20-something, 20 Everything. And it came out in 2005. And at that time, I also started coaching people. I had apprenticed with the woman who was my coach, and then later went back and got my master's degree in spiritual psychology and another one in consciousness, health, and healing. And then got various trainings, everything from NLP to hypnotherapy to inner child work to nervous system regulation. I've just kind of accumulated things over time as my own needs and interests have expanded. But my mission so much is really to help people not repeat their past over and over again. And in my 20 years of coaching, 99.99, I would even say 100%, but I'll leave that 0.01% there, anything someone's having issues with or trouble with in the present, there is a thread to their childhood. There's something in childhood that has created what they're living out today. And my mission is really to help people not keep playing out their past, whether it's like drawing in a relationship that reminds them of their dynamic with their parents, or like me, continuing to try to achieve and achieve and achieve and be kind of addicted to success, never dealing with the insecurity that stems from childhood. So really, if I were to sum it up, it's two things. It's reparenting. It's giving ourselves what we didn't get in childhood. Like no one else can meet the needs our parents didn't meet. That's really an inside job. And then liberation, really liberation from generational patterns, liberation from trauma, and liberation from a lot of the stories we've told ourselves that most of the time aren't true.
Beautiful. So what role does our childhood plays in kind of like mapping our fears, our habits, our relationships?
Well, it's everything, because if you think about childhood, we come in, I do believe everyone comes in with their own unique karma and their own soul. And there's some things that are just like, we are the way we are. I do feel like there's some element of nature that plays into each and every one of us. And we're also molded and shaped by what happens or doesn't happen in our childhood. So in terms of our input, we're a computer that's being programmed. And I see it with my 2.5-year-old, and I'm sure you see it with your 5-year-old. Like I will say something and it will come out of her mouth anywhere from 5 minutes to 5 days later, depending on where it went in her brain. And so much of what she believes, like even, Christmas is coming up. When we're recording this, even like the belief in Santa Claus, that is because we've talked about it, right? So as children, we've been programmed by everything that we're told, everything we see, and everything that we feel and experience at the same time. She's learning how to do relationship primarily by how my husband and I do relationship. She's learning how to have a relationship with herself by how I model it. And then there are going to be things that happen in her life that imprint her. So everything that happens in our childhood, it forms the lens in which we look through life, the belief systems that are formed, and how we think about ourselves. If you tell a child over and over again, you're too much or you're too loud, they're going to believe that. If you tell a child over and over again, you're capable, you're confident, I believe in you, they're going to believe that. And then there are things that happen in our life. Trauma, as you know, has a range. And I think sometimes people minimize what happened or didn't happen in their childhood because they compare it to someone they may know or someone they may have heard had massive abuse, or, their parent died, or they were incredibly neglected, which is, anybody can go, whoa, that's for a child, that's really hard. So me over here and my parents getting divorced at 8, like that can't be that big of a deal. Or, I was teased a little bit at school, that can't be that big of a deal. And so we minimize our own trauma, our own challenges, because we look at it on a scale compared to other people, which is a way of dismissing our own experience. So we need to be honest with ourselves about, what didn't I get in childhood? What were the things that happened that were really challenging? Because as children, we have to, like, our innate, the thing that all of us feel innately is to survive, right? Mm-hmm. To stay alive. That's what we as humans are propelled to do. And as children, so much of that survival has to do with a sense of belonging, right? Like I need to be accepted by my parents on some level. Like I need to belong to this. Of course, this isn't conscious thought. This is very primal. I need to belong to this unit in order to survive, because little children need adults to thrive, right? They can't, a 5-year-old can't live on his own. And so as children, again, this is all subconscious. We start to think, oh, okay, what do I need to do to survive in this unit? Do I need to be funny to distract from all the chaos? Do I need to be a good girl to get my mom's approval? Do I need to get really good grades and be really smart to get my dad's validation? Do I need to be quiet? What do I need to do in order to be accepted? And it starts in the family unit, and then it extends out into our social unit. And so oftentimes we abandon like who we naturally are, and we become who we need to be to fit into the family, to fit into society, to fit into the culture, to fit into the peer group. And all the while, we're kind of abandoning who we naturally are. So much of our adulthood, what people often come to me and say, like, I need to learn who I really am. And I say, well, actually, you need to remember who you really are, because it's in there. There's just a bunch of math and a bunch of survival strategies that you've adopted in order to survive. So our childhood, what happens, what doesn't happen, has a massive impact on how we see the world, how we engage with the world, what we believe about the world, and how we act in the world.
And as a mom, kind of being aware of that, I'm thinking to myself, wow, my little one will have to do inner child work on this and on this and on this. And the guilt that you have as a mom, especially when you're aware of the things that you do or don't do, you're like, oh, should have done this, should have done that. So I guess this is when I have that heavy guilt for myself. It's probably I need to do some inner child work on that. Am I doing good? I'm like, yeah, I'm a great mom most of the time, but those times when I'm not, I'm like, oh, that's not awesome.
Yeah, and that's the thing. We have to give ourselves grace. And you literally could be speaking out of my mouth, because I have the same challenges. And I actually got a coach / therapist when my daughter was about 18 months, because I noticed myself just having this really high expectation of myself, especially, someone who specializes in developmental psychology and attachment. Like, I know all the ways I can mess her up. Like, it's a lot of pressure to just know all the ways that you might be like impacting your kid. And I really needed to get help with managing my guilt and managing my high expectations, and also just recovering from the massive change and birth and the identity shifts and all of that. And there's a couple of things that have been comforting for me in this. One, in knowing that, the biggest thing I can offer my daughter, well, not the biggest, one of the biggest, is a secure attachment. And a secure attachment with her is not about being perfect. It's not about being there 100% of the time. It's really about being consistent and repair.
Yeah.
So in those moments where I might get frustrated, or I might, what's something I judge myself for, say something that I don't really mean, or, I'm hard on myself and she hears me say it, something like that, I repair. Like the other day, she was just being a 2-year-old, and she was like not going to bed and running around the house. And I was tired too. And I was like, Athena, it is time to go to bed. And I wasn't yelling, but I basically said it at that tone. And because I have this expectation of myself to stay regulated as a mom, when I am dysregulated, instead of going, of course, like, I'm human, like, it's okay to get frustrated sometimes as a mom, sometimes I get really hard on myself. And that's been my journey, because so much of my inner child wounding is thinking I needed to be perfect to make sure other people were okay.
Bingo.
To make sure that other people's, like, if I was good and I was perfect, then other people wouldn't be upset. And so it kind of programmed this codependent thing where I confused where I stopped and someone else began.
Wow, it's like, as you're speaking, I feel like you're talking about me too. I'm like, yes, I'm with you on that. So I understand that so deeply. Continue.
Yeah. And so what my work as a mom is not getting too engaged in her upset, right? Like, just letting her be. And also, when I do, just get dysregulated or get frustrated, or all the normal things that moms do, especially of young children, to not then shame myself or think I've screwed up my kid forever or any of that, to talk to her. So what I do in those situations is I say, yeah, I got a little frustrated, and I raise my voice, and I apologize for talking a little louder. I'm going to take a breath. I'm going to move this frustration through my body, and we're going to try this again. And the cool thing is, now I see her doing that. Like, when she gets frustrated, she's like, I'm getting really upset. I need to take a breath. And I see her doing that. And I'd rather teach her how to have emotions and move them through than let's suffocate our emotions and pretend everything's okay. Because that's not an authentic way to live, and that's not a healthy way to live. And that's a great way to manifest physical disease on some level. And so, for me, the thing that helps me with the guilt is knowing that I always come back for repair, knowing that I'm doing my work. I think as moms, we can get fixated on our child, what do we need to do for our child? They're having this issue. Like, what do we need to do for them at any age? And really, it all comes back to us. It all comes back to us. And that for me has felt like both a burden and a release. It feels like a burden and a relief. It feels like a burden when I'm like, oh my God, it's all my fault. But that's only one lens to look through. It feels like a relief when it's like, oh, wow. Like, actually, best thing I can do for my daughter is do the inner work on myself. And she's going to feel that. And I think one of the reasons she chose me as a mom is because I had done so much work before she came in and really broke a lot of generational patterns.
Beautiful. Congratulations. And I think maybe 4 days ago I did craniosacral massage. And I told her, oh my God, it's amazing. I have to bring my son here because I want to help him. She's like, what do you think you're doing right now? You're being here, taking care of you is, of course, helping him.
Absolutely. 1000%. Yeah, I do. And
so we were all walking together with wounded inner child. We all have things we need to work on. How do we approach the inner child? What are some practical ways to address him or her?
Well, it kind of depends on where we are with our relationship with her or him. So people listening or watching either have young children or you've been around young children. And with children, you're not just their bestie right away. You have to build trust. You have to get into their world. I look with my own daughter, and if someone just shows up, she's not ready to let them into her world. They need to get on the ground and play with her and keep showing up. And then she's like, oh, okay, I trust you. I let you into my world. And the same thing with our own inner children. We can't just, listen to a podcast like this, be like, I need to talk to my inner child, and then expect our inner child just to show up. It's first about building rapport and building trust. So one of the best ways that I like to do that and teach that is to get a picture or several pictures. And if you don't have pictures, you can't access them, then maybe you can draw. But get pictures of different ages and just look at the picture and connect and look into your eyes and look at, your little body and whatever you're wearing and where you were, and just start saying hello. Just like, hi, little Christine. You're still in there. I see you. I'm here. And I just want you to know I'd like to get to know you better. I'd like to connect with you and spend more time with you. So that's always the first step. I find that people are really gung-ho about, I need to heal my inner child. And it just doesn't work like that, because the inner child so often feels abandoned and neglected by us that just trying to like bulldoze in and be like, we need to heal this thing from when we were 5 years old. The inner child's like, no way. And then protector parts come out that block it. So that's the first step, is building the rapport. And then, I teach a whole course on inner child. My husband and I teach it together. So, it's hard to summarize it in an interview, but I will give some like broad strokes. So after you build that rapport, it's really about uncovering what needs were most neglected or unmet in childhood. And the clue to that is, what do you struggle with right now? Right? So let's say there's a need for safety. So if you don't feel safe in your life right now, if you have been in a lot of situations where you felt unsafe, if you attract unsafe people in your life, if you walk around with a lot of anxiety, if you lean towards more of that anxious attachment, that need to feel safe probably wasn't there. Another need is belonging. We really feel like we belong in our family if we're accepted as who we are. A lot of people really struggle. They feel like their parent didn't want them, or maybe they came in as a boy, but they felt they really wanted a girl, or maybe there were a lot of other siblings, or maybe on some level they just really didn't fit in. This can be a wounding that happens, again, in the familial unit, or it can be, outside the home. And so then we struggle with like not feeling like we belong anywhere. I'll give one more example, the need for emotional expression. That's huge. Like as children, it is so important to be able to like ride the waves of your emotion and to have that emotional expression. And if we didn't really get that as a child, we're going to feel stifled in our life. We're going to feel like we can't speak up. We're going to be a people pleaser in some way. So there's many, many examples, but those are just three. So you look at, okay, what am I currently struggling with in my life? And how does that correlate to, or basically what is the unmet need that has caused this? And that is huge. Like when we can realize that, oh my gosh, I've been trying to get this unmet need met from my childhood, my whole adult life, but I've been doing it by picking similar people to those of my past. For example, let's say that, you grew up again in an unsafe house. You have that need for safety. Well, subconsciously, you attract unsafe people because they remind you of that familial unit. Let's say your dad was unsafe. They remind you of dad. And all of a sudden, you're really attracted to this person that's also unsafe because the inner child's like, oh, well, this person really feels like dad in a lot of ways. Maybe he'll meet the need that dad never could. And we all know how that turns out, right? It doesn't turn out super well because when we're attracting from a wound, we basically get the same experience we had in childhood, but we don't get the result that we wanted. So the healing that we need to do is about reparenting ourselves, is about meeting that need ourselves, grieving the fact that our parents, couldn't give it to us, healing our trauma so that we're not subconsciously attracting the same situation over and over again. We stop doing that when we're actually meeting that need inside ourselves. And that is the core of inner child healing, is reparenting ourselves, meeting those needs that we didn't get from childhood inside ourselves, and not continuing to project that outward.
Right. And how does unhealed inner child wounds play in within a romantic relationship or relationships in general?
Well, we can start with a romantic relationship, but there's threads to any type of relationship. So if we think about it as children, our most intimate relationship is that with our parents, whoever raised us. So we'll just use the word parents in this conversation. So that's the most intimate relationship we have. And that's where we learn how to do relationship. And that's where our attachment forms. And there's basically two types of attachment: secure attachment, which is that consistency, that parent that repairs. And also the other thing that I talk about in attachment theory that not many people do is like being in the right role in your family. So in secure attachment, it's very clear who's the parent and who's the child. In any of the insecure attachments, whether it's avoidant, anxious, or disorganized, sometimes it's a little muddled. So people that have insecure attachments also often have a parent that spouseified them, that parentified them, that, treated them more as a friend than a child. The boundaries were a little wobbly. So often that can lead to an insecure attachment. And whatever that attachment is that was formed in childhood, well, first it's healable and it's changeable, but until we actually heal more towards a secure attachment, and that starts with our relationship with ourselves, we will seek out that whatever our primary attachment was. So for example, if as a kid you had a parent that was really enmeshed with you, and you kind of played that codependent dance, maybe you were a people pleaser or whatever, you're probably going to have more of an anxious attachment because You didn't know, again, where you stopped and someone else began. You didn't really develop a strong sovereign sense of self because it was kind of always about the other person. There was inconsistency there. There's inconsistency in any of the insecure attachments, whether it's anxiousness, avoidance, or disorganized. And with that kind of like codependent, not really clear sense of self, you are going to most likely attract codependent relationships, relationships where you rescue people, relationships where you might be attracted to kind of that narcissist personality that love bombs you, but then you just feel anxious because you don't know where you stand, emotionally unavailable people. Basically, you're going to feel anxious in relationship, and you're not really going to feel that real secure attachment. Let's look at avoidant attachment. If you had a relationship with a parent where it was like very hot and cold, and you felt a sense of being neglected, the parent wasn't really emotionally available, you kind of had to parent yourself in a lot of ways, then in relationships will be okay until they start to get too intimate. Until someone really starts to love you, until someone really starts to know you, until like your alone time starts to get bumped up against. And then with that avoidance style, because of the childhood wounding, it's the brakes will come on. And a lot of times we will end up sabotaging that relationship. We'll make the other person wrong. We'll cheat, we'll lie, we'll come up with a lot of excuses, we'll dive into work, a protector part comes forward and generally sabotages. And then with the disorganized attachment style, that comes from a lot of chaos in childhood, like a lot of chaos, and just really not knowing where you stand. And so often in relationships, it's a come here, go away energy. So it's like, I want you in a relationship, but no, go away. Oh, wait, you're going? No, come back. Or just a complete like fear of any kind of relationship because there's such a lack of trust. So that's just attachment style, right? That's just like one piece of how our childhood and what happened or didn't happen shows up in relationships. And I'll just say one more thing and then we can pause. So in summary, those core unmet needs, and that's why it's so important to really dive in and go, okay, what were my core unmet needs in childhood? Like, was it safety? Was it belonging? Was it emotional expression? What were the things I really needed that I didn't really get? Because that is the thing we will hunt for in other people. But like I said before, we will just attract people like the people who hurt us.
Right. So I did a lot of work on my own childhood and the way I was brought up, which was, I mean, I had difficult times, and I forgive my parents, and I know some people are having a hard time not only forgetting but not taking ownership and blaming their parents for their inner child wounds. So what will be your advice to them?
Well, I do think that some degree, let me say the whole part. I do think some degree of blame is necessary because part of inner child healing is feeling the anger and rage we have for our parents.
Yes.
Because so let's just use an example. Let's say you're a woman and your mom was an alcoholic and wasn't really there. As an adult, you know that your mom's mom, your grandma, was abusive. And maybe she had some abuse, from an uncle in the family or something. Basically, grandma had an awful life. So you understand that she wasn't really there to parent your mother. And that's why mother's an addict. So your adult self can understand that. And your adult self may go, I picked her for a reason and it's made me stronger. And it was all part of my learning. I have compassion for my mom and I forgive her. Lovely, but spiritual bypass. The inner child is like not on board for that. The inner child is like, well, I'm a kid. And when I was 5, I didn't know that the reason my mom was drunk in the corner and not helping me, go to the bathroom or whatever I really needed at the moment, I didn't know that it was because she had this crappy childhood. Like all I know is I'm 5 and my mom isn't there for me. And so we really need to honor the journey of the inner child. Down the road, we do want to get to forgiveness of our parents. They did the best they could. But that's down the road. I never say to someone who's just starting their inner child journey, your parents did the best they could. Because to the child, no, they did not. They did not to the child. So we often need to start with, I'm really mad at my parents. Like, I'm really upset. And, I teach an anger release technique and letter writing technique, and it's something called the empty chair process. So that kid can get all that out. And this
Mm.
is often something I bump against with people, because especially if they have any cultural programming or people pleasing patterning or even religious programming, like getting mad at mom and dad is not allowed. Like, they feel like they're just honoring. And what I say to that is, it's inside of you. That emotion is there. You suppressing it and pretending it's not there isn't serving the relationship. So it's never about calling mom and dad up and be like, you messed me up in all these ways, and blaming them to their face. It is about doing the inner work and releasing any of the anger and frustration we have, and also the grief.
Mm.
I always say there's two deaths of our parents we need to grieve: their actual physical transition out of their body, and the death of the ideal, of who we always wish they could be. Because we will keep looking for that in relationships with other people until we grieve and we accept, my dad is never going to love me the way I wanted him to.
Mm.
My mom is never going to see me the way that I want her to. And we grieve that. We actually grieve that. So going through the anger, going through the rage, going through the grief is a huge part of it. And oftentimes we need the blame to get at the anger. We don't sit and blame, because that just makes us a victim and then the villains. And then we're looking for somebody else to be the hero, right?
Mm.
So we never sit and blame, but I often use blame with clients, or we use blame in the inner child workshop to get to the anger and the rage and then the sadness and the grief. And then down the road, we can get to the forgiveness.
Yeah, I love that. I love what you mentioned about spiritual bypassing, because it's so easy to do. Like, oh, I'm enlightened, I'm spiritual, I'm going to just forgive and forget. And then, people that stuff their emotions, they get hurt down the road, whether it's a disease in their body, or a destructive relationship, or something, because if you don't deal with it, it's not going to go away. It's just going to actually kind of like grow and show up in a different part in your life. And I like that you're so kind with people, and you allowing them to express their emotions and take their time, and acknowledgement and grief is huge. I haven't thought about it this way, where you're actually grieving the parent that you didn't have. It's beautiful. So with you working with many people, and helping them in many ways, including inner child work, what was one of the most emotional moment or surprising moments you came across?
And working with other people?
Yeah, with their inner child.
Oh my gosh. There's been...
And also for you, I would love to know, like, what was it like for you? Like, what were the revelations?
Well, I'll start with other people first. The thing that I have seen the most is when people do inner child work, their life starts to flow.
Mm.
The things they always wanted, whether it's their career or expression in the world. Like, I have a client I'm thinking of that just finished a book. And one of the inner child healings that she really worked on was a learning disability, and like being teased and being told she wasn't as smart as her brothers, and all kinds of other things. I actually just ran into another client who, introduced me to her husband and her children, and she vowed never to get married because her childhood, or have children.
Wow, I got goosebumps.
Yeah, her childhood was
Amazing.
so chaotic. And I saw her after, I had been about 5 years since I worked with her. And she's like, I have a 3-year-old and I'm pregnant. I'm like, oh my God,
Wow.
that's me. This is my husband. And I'm so happy. So, the stories just go on and on. I can think of another gentleman who, was in a really just not great marriage.
Mm.
His wife was very difficult and wasn't treating him right. And as a kid, he had a mom he had to take care of.
Mm.
So he became the knight in shining armor. He became the rescuer, and thought that was his role in relationship, and was in this marriage and was trying and trying and trying to make her happy. And we did the inner child work, and he went back to a memory of like feeling this burden of like taking care of his mom, and like helping that little boy understand that wasn't his job. Like, it was his mom's job to take care of him. We did all this healing around it, and he's divorced. and he's so happy. It's like the color came back into his face, and he's dating women that are way healthier. So
Nobody's sucking the life out of him daily. Wow.
and I have so many stories about people, money things change, health things change, just so much change. Because if you think about the entelechy of the soul is to evolve, we really are here. Earth is a school, and our childhood is like the curriculum. I believe we pick our parents and certain situations, and our destined, our whole, I'm trying to find words for this. The whole point of existence is to evolve our consciousness.
Yeah.
And so much of evolving our consciousness happens with inner child work, because so much of the burden and so much of the belief systems that dim our consciousness are formed in childhood. So when we can liberate ourselves from those, we elevate our consciousness and we step more into like our soul alignment, right? And that's when life just, it doesn't necessarily, like, there's still challenges. Like, I would very much say I've done my inner child healing and I'm very much on the path of my soul. And I still have challenges because I'm human. And like, I expect that, right? Because that's, we learn in this dimension through contrast. And that's how we evolve. But life gets a lot less triggering when we do inner child work. And for me, to answer your question, I would say my whole life is a result of inner child healing. I'm in a career where I'm not trying to prove myself anymore, because I've healed so much of my, so much of my ambition was driven by insecurity. And now I just really do things I love. And that's such a relief. And I'm in a marriage where my husband and I are so committed to growth. I'm in a relationship with someone who will sit in the weeds with me when we're in it, and will own his end and I'll own my end, and we will fight for the relationship together. And he's evolving his consciousness as well. And, I have a daughter, and I was blessed with this incredible being to, get to be a guide for, and hopefully, I do think that as conscious parents, we can spare our children from a lot of the really, really awful stuff that no child should have to go through. And we're human. Like, there's certain things and we're not going to
Hate
get
being
right.
human.
I know, it's really, I know, it's like, I did choose this on some level. My soul did pick this.
Yeah. I think most of our struggle here on earth is our souls come from this beautiful place of unity and light. And then we come into this duality and emotions and everything that's going on. It's so wild.
I saw it with my daughter. I saw it because she was so calm in the womb. Like, she moved, but she was just very calm. And every time, the midwife would check her heart rate, they'd be like, man, her heart rate is just, she's just really, you're going to have this Zen baby. And she came out and she was like,
I don't want to be here. What is this place?
I know. And there would be times where she'd be sleeping on my chest, and she still does this at 2.5 sometimes, where she'll be sleeping and then she'll wake up and realize she's human and go, So I see it. Like, I see when they're that little, especially when she was a newborn, I could see just the like, oh man, I'm doing this human thing again. Like, oh. But it's how we evolve as souls. So, we choose it.
Yes. How do you help people give a safe space for their inner child? Is there a process or something to if somebody wants to talk to their inner child, in the process, of course, creating a relationship, how do they build a safe space for them?
Yeah. Well, again, we teach this in our inner child course, which is just christinehasler.com/inner child, if anyone like really wants to dive deep. But after building rapport, like with the picture that I talked about, a really great way is to do dominant, non-dominant handwriting.
I love that. Yeah, that was my first episode.
Oh, really?
On this podcast. Yeah, it was Bill Donius, and it was non-dominant handwriting. That was the whole episode.
Yes. So I love doing that because your adult self will write with your dominant hand. So it might just be like, hi, little Christine, how are you today? And then using me as an example, my left hand is my non-dominant hand. So I take the pen or the marker or whatever in my left hand and then just see what comes out. So that the great thing about writing with your non-dominant hand is it connects more to your subconscious mind and it slows you down, right? And so that's just a easy, anybody can do that. That's a great way to start that dialogue.
I love it. I once did an inner child meditation to a group of women, and at the end of it, like, I had one woman who started crying, and she was like 21, and she said that she never cries, and it was the first time she cried in years, just by holding on to that little child. And then I had a mother and daughter in the crowd, and the daughter said that in her meditation, she was actually holding her mom's hand and they were dancing together as a little child. It's so beautiful. And then in the group, which I like what you said about the photo, spontaneously in the group chat, women started to post their, their younger selves, like the photos from age 5, age 6, age 7. It's really beautiful. What are you working on currently that is like brings you meaning and joy and passion in your life?
Well, always doing inner child work with people. And then I'm really excited that we have our Be the Queen program coming up. And that's a program that I met my husband when I was 40 or 41. I can't remember, something like that. And I had been married before. And I got divorced when I was in my early 30s. And so in my 30s, when everybody was getting married and having babies and all that, I was divorced and painfully single. And it was kind of crickets for a while. And I did all the dating stuff, and I got a dating coach, and I did the courses, and I read Calling in the One and all the things. And it was kind of similar to my 20-something experience where I read the books on the quarter life crisis, but nothing was really working for me. Like nothing felt comprehensive on the emotional, spiritual, energetic level as well. And so I was like, well, I'm just going to create my own program to call them in. And I'm just going to become the queen, inside of myself. And so I devised this whole program for myself, and it worked. And my husband lived in Perth, Australia. I lived in San Diego. I really called him in from continents away.
How did you meet?
Well, I was over at a friend's house, and his picture was up on my friend's husband's computer screen. They were working on a project together, and I saw it from across the room, and I thought I knew him. It was a soul recognition. And my friend said, oh, well, come over here. I wanted you to look at this website anyway. And so I got a closer look, and I didn't know his name. And then they said, oh my gosh, he's actually really great. And you're both going to be in Europe this summer. Do you want to meet? And one of the things that I was in my own personal Be the Queen program is I had a pattern, and this comes from my childhood, of drawing in men that were not really ready, that really weren't in the place for commitment that I was. Yeah. And so I was really clear. She said, do you want an introduction to him? And I said, I'm not looking for a friend. Please ask him if he's in this space where he's calling in his queen and his commitment ready. And if he's not, I have no interest in being introduced. And so my friend asked him, and he said yes.
In those
and we were
words?
Introduced. And yeah, she said, I said, please be clear. Don't dance around it. Ask him clearly, because I'm anyone who's a match for me, those words will not scare away. That's how clear I was inside myself, because I had done so much healing on belonging and insecurity and the wound about being chosen. Because most women carry whether it's conscious or subconscious, because it's in the collective, this whole being chosen thing. And because of that, we will often compromise on our values or even our intuition, because that fear of not being chosen, if we really want relationship and family or our age or whatever, sometimes will talk us into things. And I did the whole, oh, I can change him thing. I did that. And it never works. And so I was clear. And anyway, he was a yes. We got introduced. We connected over WhatsApp for 3 months, had many conversations. I asked him all the things. That was another thing I did in my own program and that I teach is you ask the questions you want to ask. You don't do this whole game thing. And we met 3 months later in Greece, and we were married 3 months after that. Yeah. So the whole point of that is then when people on social media started to see, like, I've got this boyfriend and now husband, women were like, what did you do? Because I was open about the fact that I, had trouble dating and finding and was sick of apps and the swiping. And it seems like only men that were like 30 years older than me were interested in me. And I just was really having a hard time. And, or I did the emotionally unavailable thing. And so I asked and asked and asked, how did you do this? And I said, well, it wasn't luck. Like, there was an actual process I went through, and women kept asking, can you please turn it into a program? And so I did. And I actually teach it with my husband so that they get like both sides. And we do nervous system work, we do inner child work, and I teach the whole system. So I'm excited that in February, we're going to have a free 3-day event. Because we do it around Valentine's Day, where I give a women a lot of this. And then if they're interested, they can join us in the live course.
Ah, that's beautiful. And where can people find that?
So just go to christinehassler.com/queen.
Nice. And what does being a queen means to you? Queen. Like, there's so many association with that word.
Yeah, I know there is. But if we go archetypical, right? Not like Queen of England, right? If we think archetypes, not like role in like human society, but I'm thinking more archetypical. A queen is someone like she's really like embodied in who she is, right? She's not concerned about what other people think of her. Of course, she is not selfish or narcissistic. There's a sense of service and kindness, but there's not a people pleasing. There's not a proving. She doesn't need anyone to love her or like her because she's so sovereign inside herself. So if you think of a queen, I think of sovereignty, and sovereignty to me really means I'm free of the reins that hold me to anyone else's opinion of me. I'm going to like adhere to my values. That doesn't mean I'm selfish, but I don't get caught up in needing to be anybody for anything to anybody else. And so that degree of sovereignty and that value driven, like queens are value driven. They're not insecurity driven, right? They're not fear driven. They're value driven. And there's also queens have a huge sense of discernment. And that's what I really love supporting women in, is really trusting their discernment, like a yes or a no. And there's not maybes. It's like very clear.
Love that. What are your 3 top tips to living a stellar life?
I mean, do your work, like your inner work. Focus on relationships, not things. I think at the end of the day, relationships are the key to really living a stellar life, because it's through those mirrors and through that experience and through that love that we really open up deeper. And this kind of goes with go do your work, but I'll add it as a third, like parent yourself. Compassion goes a long way. Like having that self-compassion and self-love and really being the parent to ourselves that we didn't have is huge.
I love that. And where can people find you?
Christine Hassler is my website and Instagram and all the things. And and my podcast. So I actually coach people live on my podcast. I've been doing it for over 10 years. It's unscripted, unproduced. Someone calls in with a question and I coach them. So if you want to hear a blend of spiritual psychology, inner child work, coaching, all the things, that's over at and On With It is the name of the podcast.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much. It was a fun, great conversation. And thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it so much.
Yeah. And thank you, listeners. Remember to do your inner work. Focus on relationships, not things. Parent yourself and have self-compassion and self-love and have a stellar life. This is Orion. Till next time.